Humans of the cardboard. This format is not half bad, but there's always something degenerate in the format. So today we're going over the handful of like degenerate things that are currently in the format, just talking about them, just so you're aware. And this is kind of a video that's like, oh, if you're excited for your nationals coming up, maybe it's cool to just keep these things in mind. You should have a deck that has ways to handle these things in one way or another, hopefully. And because these are the things that, like, first and foremost in any of these matchups, you have to be able to handle before you can even attempt to like start actually playing Yu-Gi-Oh! So let's get into it. We're going to zoom through this pretty quick, I think. Nothing, I mean, it should be relatively quick here, to be honest. So first things first, Hot Red Dragon Archfiend King Calamity. The Punkthyrian decks are making this right now. This card is insane. It's one of the craziest Floodgates you've ever seen. When he's Synchro Summoned, he makes it so that your opponent can't activate cards or effects for the rest of the turn, and even cards they already control can't activate their effects either. So if they Synchro Summon this on your turn, you just can't do anything. You have to have either a Droplet or Chalice or something to that effect to quick effect respond to this. Otherwise, you will just lose the duel. He's already 4,000 attack. If they just have any other offensive pressure, they're just going to OTK you immediately on the next turn. It's brutal. It's such a brutal win condition. I don't even think the deck's dead or anything. If this gets banned, I do think this could be a bannable target. We've seen Konami go after cards like this, the True King of All Calamities, the Rongo mini ads, those just absolutely brutal Floodgate monsters. The Elder Entity cards. So I could see that one day. But for right now, it's crazy. It is the main win condition if they get that combo off for the Punkthyrian deck. It's very, very scary. Next up, we have Artifact Scythe, another lockout card. I mean, we're talking about degeneracy. Like, locking you out of the game is as degenerate as it gets. So Scythe locking you out of the extra deck, absolutely insane. Kind of similar thing. As far as responding to it, you kind of have to have a quick effect response, and it almost has to be Droplet, because right now the main way people are going into this is using TG Wonder Magician to pop it, which means if you pop it and he uses effect to revive and he comes back and then he uses effect on the field, even if they have Forbidden Chalice, you can actually just chain the TG Wonder Magician to dodge the Chalice. So you kind of have to use Droplet, pitching a monster so that they can't chain the TG Wonder Magician. It's almost like the only way to really like handle that, or you have to have something like a Cosmic Cyclone to hit Scythe before they even get to pop it. That way it gets banished instead. That's like really the only couple things that I can think of that are like actually great there, and you know, you gotta have it. It's really brutal, really, really brutal. Most of the decks that are doing this right now are like just some of the Synchro amalgamation decks, the Adventure Synchro jumbled decks. I've seen some Libromancer stuff and some other fringe decks that if you can just spam enough with a Hulk, you'll just go Hulk Dagda and Scythe them. It's really strong because you end with like a Barone and a Scythe lock just off of that. It's pretty good, and then whatever else you get out is just icing on the cake, but really strong. Next up here, we move to Dimensional Barrier. This card's crazy. I mean, it's one of those side deck cards. It's sided for going first when you know you're playing against a very extra deck type locked matchup. So like Despia, you're calling Fusion. Sword Soul, you're calling Synchro. You're seeing a lot of people main deck this, although I will say that as of late, this has been seeing a little bit less play in favor of another card we'll talk about in a couple of slides here, but it's still a really powerful card. When you know that matchup, or if you're really expecting Despia to be everywhere, Sword Soul to be everywhere, it's insane. Obviously, stuff like Floowandereeze cares not at all about this, but for the matchups it is good against, especially if you think they're not good matchups for you, this card is great. Now we move to some Floowandereeze options that they've been doing. These are some of the reasons why Floowandereeze is so good in the format, because some of the stuff that they do is just so brutal to the other decks in the format. First and foremost, Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds. We've seen this card actually over the last couple of years see a lot of play, whether it's the Samorg Link 3 being played in like Tri-Brigade and stuff to just cheat this out and just set up an insane Floodgate for your opponent. But now it's in just Floowandereeze, where they just search it. Their deck just searches it and then extends it onto the field. It's really strong. It's one of those things where when you look at a Floowandereeze board, if they go all the way through and get to the Barrier Statue as well, you need to deal with that first. That is the very first thing you need to deal with, because if you cannot clear that, you cannot even attempt to deal with the board, the rest of the board, or even try to play at all. So I think this one definitely needs to go on there. There are definitely tons of duels where people, I'm sure, just look at their hand, look at the Barrier Statue and go, I don't have an out to it. I lose. Sorry. And the other thing that the Floodgate players are doing right now is Dimension Shifter. It's kind of like a must play in the deck because, in my opinion, this is like the best hand trap in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! At least maybe like the most powerful hand trap. The problem with it is that very, very, very few decks can afford to play it. It feels like Konami just designs decks nowadays to want to use the graveyard as a crucial piece of resource management. And so the decks that don't need that, like Flunders, who banish their own cards, like just any other deck like Gren Maju, those kinds of decks just really don't care about that extra value in grave. This card becomes an insane blowout versus almost every other deck that's in the meta. If you look at the last like 5 metas, I used to think like this card was matchup dependent, meta dependent, and then I started looking at the meta. Unless it's like a very specific meta, it's like every meta. It's like 3 or 4 out of the top 5 decks all just like literally pass to this card. It's crazy. It's one of the most powerful cards in the game. Specifically hand trap wise as well. But if you draw it later on, it's bad. If you draw 2 of them, it's really bad. But you still gotta respect it. This card is so crazy. If you see it, it can be enough to win the duel by itself. And this is the Floodgate we were talking about when we were looking at Dimensional Barrier. Anti-Spell is insane. It's being sided in almost everybody's side right now. A lot of people are opting for this over Dimensional Barrier because this is a little bit better versus Flunders. This is a little bit better versus stuff like the Punk Therian deck, whereas Dimensional Barrier is like hit or miss versus them at times. Anti-Spell is just stupid. I mean, the amount of just like either engine spells you have to play, pots to add consistency to your deck, or even going second cards, you know, your lightning storms, your dark ruler no mores, your droplets, they need to have those at the ready. And because like that's probably what they're expecting to like break your board with. But when you flip this, unless it's exactly like droplet, they're kind of just saying, oh, this hand of 4 spells, including 2 search spells and 2 anti-side cards, Dark Ruler No More and Lightning Storm, literally can't be activated. I just lose. I have 2 cards in hand to play with. You're never just ending on this. This is just a bonus on your board. And it's crazy. It's crazy that this card can pretty much pretty much just essentially hand rip like 4 cards out of your opponent's hand that are just unplayable. It's crazy. This card's insane. I could easily see this card getting banned at some point if Konami just decides that this card's just too degenerate. It's just winning too many games by itself. IO-esque in that factor, in that kind of like, you know, alleyway. It's crazy. And the final card is Mystic Mine. A couple weeks ago at YCS Hartford, we saw that Mystic Mine took over. The guy in first place was playing like 10 cards that got you to Mystic Mine. He was playing like every card that could get you to Mystic Mine in the game, maxing out on it. Did really well. Props to him. I'm not blaming him for playing it at all. I just personally hate this card. I hate using it. I hate playing against it. I just don't enjoy it all in all. And I just hate that this card like requires a response. And the bad part too is like it requires a response that is not even necessarily like great to play in any given format. I mean, we know Yu-Gi-Oh! Nowadays, if you're going to a high-level tournament, you're not expecting to run into a lot of back row decks. So you don't see anybody really wanting to main back row hate because Despia, Sword Soul, even Floandrees, like they're just mediocre. They're not doing enough. They're not powerful enough. But when just because one single card exists in the game, it's not an archetypal card. It is a generically splashable card that almost any deck can splash at any time if they want. And it pretty much says like have an out or lose the duel. Like if you don't play an out in your main, you lose the duel. So the fact that like every single competitive player is probably thinking this, like, I should probably have at least one Mystic Mine out in my main so that maybe I can draw into it in a long, drug out game by Mystic Mine and still be able to, like, somehow get a dub out of that. Like, the fact that like the whole community as a whole in the competitive scene has to think that way, just, it goes to show how degenerate this card is. But yeah, I mean, you're going to see it. It's going to be everywhere. But luckily, the more this card is anticipated for, the less the less good it'll do. I'm sure a lot of people who played it in Hartford, if they are going to nationals or whatever, are going to reel back on it a little bit because they might say, listen, nobody had really been looking around for Mystic Mine for a little bit. It's kind of been a little under the radar because it gets really popular and everybody's ready for it, and then it gets a little less popular, and then nobody's ready for it. When nobody's ready for it, you can kill them. But if you're going to nationals, like everybody's going to have outs to it, probably outs in the main as well as outs in the side because they refuse to just lose Mystic Mine matchups for no reason in Swiss, and I get that. I definitely get it. But there you go. Those are your most degenerate cards of the format. Be ready for that. I guess if you are planning to go to nationals or whatever other events you have prior to nationals, like, it just gives you an idea of what to be looking out for. So if you want to pick a deck, maybe you pick a deck that you think can have options for most of these things inherently, and then maybe the other things you can kind of seal up with tech cards, defensive cards, and whatnot. But there you go. That's the video for today. Let me know if you think there's anything else I missed here in the format that you think is, deserving of being called degenerate in the format. I'd love to hear your thoughts there. But I'm out of here. Thank you so much for watching, as always, guys. I'll see you in the next one.